This is chapter 17, and let's start with the quest for political order. The early medieval period, the European people were in recovery from all the invasions, which also placed political, economic, and cultural foundations for the start of a new society. Europe started as a very disorganized and politically disunited region, and only about in the 10th century did the European people enter the large trading world again due to the effective political authority and a productive agricultural economy. Three developments that were the foundation of the power of the European society. They first restored the political order after the invasions. It was a centralized imperial rule. Second, they started to recover the economy. They pushed more for an agricultural production than industrial. This helped trade increase. Third, the Christian church was put into Rome, which allowed religious leadership and kept the cultural unity in Western Europe. Invaders established successor states after they topped Rome's authority. These states were put in the Western Roman Empire. There were a lot of cities in the Western Roman Empire that lost population throughout the empire that was already falling apart despite the help that they were getting from the Roman generals that were in the cities. Trade and manufacturing decreased. These had an impressive imperial states. They influenced the political, social, and cultural development of Western Europe. They gained from the agriculture of Europe, and they also helped Christianity be the primary culture and religion in Western Europe. When Rome fell, the Franks got there, but they didn't really know how to control the Roman society until the Franks got ruled by Clovis from 481 to 511, and he was considered a strong military and political leader. Under Clovis' control, the Franks became very powerful. The Franks stopped being nobodies and became the most powerful and dynamic state in Western Europe. Most Germanic invaders converted to Arian Christianity, while the Franks were mostly still polytheists until Clovis converted the state to Roman Christianity, not Arian. The alliance with the Roman Church made the Franks stronger. Germanic kingdoms were put as successor states by the late 5th century in place of the Roman Empire. Control was all over the place. Germanic people were gaining Roman influence as they expanded into Rome. Many converted into Christianity. After Clovis died, the Carolingians took control. Charles Martel was the leader and the founder of the dynasty. Charles never took the throne, but his son did. Charlemagne had the Carolingians reach their highest during his rule of 768 through 814. He was Charles Martel's grandson. He was very smart but could barely read. He spread his authority beyond the Carolingian Empire. Mariners had developed remarkable sea-building techniques and seafaring skills, which increased their safety in the open sea. Due to that, they had a lot of settlements everywhere in the north, but they soon disappeared. Vikings were also able to cross heavy seas and rivers as well. They were amazing sailors and had very efficient boats. They would sail up to places and attack people and raid their things. The Carolingians became the main target for the invasions due to them barely having any protection against them or having any navy of any sort. Different areas had different responses to the invasions. England basically fled more north and had more settlements. Germany had their Carolingian authority fell, so the local lords took matters into their own hands and had kings. The most successful was King Otto I of Saxony. Finally, in France, they were ruled by their local authorities. All these kingdoms and local authorities that were popping up prevented the chance of a centralized imperial rule.
King Alfred had created the idea to merge them into a larger realm. In order to do that, he expanded the southern on to Saxon, Angles, and other Germanic held by Danish invaders. He had made his navy challenge the Vikings, conquering the Danish settlers. Germany. Colony authorities were unable to stop the Magyars' invasions, so local lords tried to control them. The most successful one was Otto, soon to be king of Saxony. In 962, the Pope had made Otto the king. The French had created castles, armed forces, and collected taxes. Vikings had established many settlements in northern France, where they carved out small independent states. During the 18th century, a man named Adam Smith had created the feudal system, or feudalism. It had helped Europe a lot as a society that brought political and social order to medieval Europe. The coloring era, jobs of the lords of the monarchs did were baking, beering, wiring, and self-manure products as iron tools, leather goods, and textiles. After the 8th century, the heavy plow became more available. It was a heavy tool equipped with to break up the root networks of weeds. It was more expensive than a light plow. It required an oxen or horse to pull it, and increased agriculture production. Rural societies had linked regions, so most of their trading items were wheat, rice, spinach, eggplants, limes, oranges, and melons. The Norse mariners were first active in the North Seas. They were called from ports to Russia to Ireland with cargoes of fish, furs from Scandinavia, honey from Portland, wheat from England, wine from France, and beer from Low Country, swords from Germany, had all linked to Europe. Before the Roman Empire in 200 CE, their population was 36 million. 200 centuries later, it dropped to 31 million. Another 200 centuries later, 26 million. All declined due to the epidemic diseases and unsettling conditions. Then rose to 29 million in the 1800s. A century later, it grew to 32 million. 10th century, it was 36 million. After the fall of the Roman Empire, due to Christianity and the German invaders, few had embraced Christianity, not until Clovis and Franks had converted to Christianity.
Welcome to my TED Talk. In nomadic society in Eastern Asia, they had a flexible social structure. Nobles could pass on their titles to their heirs, but they could lose their status if deemed unfit to be a noble. Peasants could also earn nobility through brave acts or loyalty. The conversion to Islam of the nomadic tribes brought about the Khan, which were the rulers of the nomads. The Khans helped expand influence by their military prowess. The nomadic tribes were well-skilled equestrians and archers whose skills were unmatched. The Seljuk Turks, who were converts of Islam, took away Anatolia from the Byzantine Empire. As the Turks overthrew the Byzantine, they rewarded those who converted to Islam by giving them levied taxes on the church, but restricted economic opportunities. Sometimes taking away church property claimed most of northern India by the 13th century, using elephant corps to fend off the likes of Turkish and Mongolian invaders. Muhammad of Ghazni, the leader of the Ghaznavid Turks, hated Buddhism and Hinduism, frequently raiding shrines, temples, and monasteries. He also usually destroyed the buildings entirely and slaughtered the inhabitants. These Turkish invaders encouraged conversion to Islam and enabled the faith to secure a great presence in northern Islam. Genghis Khan was the founder of the Great Mongol Empire. Born in 1167 to a noble family and a rough start to life, he grew his empire. The Great Khan grew his power by forging powerful allies and demolishing troublesome allies. And by 1206, he had successfully unified the Mongol tribes and was given the title of Genghis Khan. How Genghis Khan ruled his empire is one of the many ways remained powerful under his rule. He genuinely mistrusted the Mongolian tribes' organization, so he redistributed and broke up the tribes. He then formed new military units made up of the different tribes of men. He also had every man of suitable age join the military units. For military ranks, Genghis Khan chose generals and other high rankers based on skill or loyalty, rather than choosing based on kinship and tribal status. Genghis Khan also established a capital at Karakorum, where he built a luscious palace. The capital signified Mongol wealth, superiority, and authority. Although the Mongol state had a small population, the army magnified the power of the state. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire had 1 million people, and during Genghis Khan's life, the army was about 1,000 to 125,000 Mongols. You may be wondering, wow, that's only 1% of China's population at the time. How did so few numbers conquer so much of Eurasia? Horses. That's how. The Mongols were so good at horseback riding, they were practically the first horse girls of the world. They were also excellent bowmen who could shoot someone 656 feet away. Another reason they were so effective was their mobility and being able to travel about 62 miles in one day. For when they were conquering enemies, if they surrendered without resistance, the Mongols would treat them fairly, and the skilled were treated especially well when they joined their ranks. If they resisted, however, the Mongols would ruthlessly kill them all. Once Genghis Khan had his army together, he got to conquering. He attacked the Turks in Tibet, northern China, Persia, and the Central Asia steppes. This benefited his empire greatly, as it protected the empire from possible challenges to his rule. The conquest of northern China began in 1211 CE, when Mongolian troops invaded the Jurchen Realm, the people who've been ruling northern China since 1127. In 1215, the Mongols had captured the Jurchen capital, now named Khan Balik, which served as the Mongol capital in China. Fights between the Jurchen and Mongols continued until 1234, and by 1220, the Mongols established control over northern China. Moving away from China for just a second, Genghis Khan wanted to establish trade and diplomatic relations with the Khosrow Shah, who ruled Afghanistan and Persia. But when the Shah killed Genghis Khan's envoys and merchants, Genghis Khan saddled up for revenge. And after they drove the Shah to an island where he died, the Mongols then wreaked havoc on the Shah's realm. By the time of Genghis Khan's death, in 1227, he had laid the foundation of a vast empire. However, Genghis Khan was a conqueror, not an administrator, and never laid down a strong central government. Instead, he assigned Mongol overlords to supervise local administrations. Later, Genghis Khan's heirs would continue to conquer for the empire, but also then undertook the task of designing a more permanent administration to guide the fortunes of the Mongol Empire.
What exactly happened to the Mongols after Genghis Khan's death? Well, after his death, there was a struggle of power between his sons and grandsons, and eventually it split the Mongol Empire into 4 regions across Eurasia. However, the 3 main regions was China, which was controlled by the Great Khans, and they were also the wealthiest. Persia fell under the control of the Ilkhans, and the Golden Horde dominated Russia. The ruler of the Mongols in China was Kublai, and he happened to be the most talented of the descendants, and as he unleashed ruthless attacks against his enemies, as well as took in cultural values of the people, and worked to improve the welfare of his subjects. He was a supporter of Buddhism and provided support for Daoists, Muslims, and Christians. The great traveler Marco Polo even praised him for generosity toward the poor and efforts to construct the roads throughout China. He then eventually decided one day to extend Mongol rule to China as he attacked the Song dynasty in 1276 from Khanbalik at the capital of Hangzhou. And by 1279, after literally destroying the Song dynasty, he proclaimed himself emperor and established the Yuan dynasty. However, after China, he kind of lost his touch as a conqueror. He tried to invade Vietnam and Cambodia and Burma, but the Mongol forces didn't really adapt well to the climate in Southeast Asia. He also tried to invade Japan, but it didn't exactly end well either, as typhoons washed the Mongols off the face of the earth. So while all that happened in China, the Golden Horde overran Russia between 1237 and 1241. The Golden Horde maintained a large army from the steppes north of the Black Sea, which they used to raid Russia. They did not occupy Russia, but they did take the tribute from Russian cities. The Golden Horde maintained hegemony until Russian conquerors in Moscow rejected their authority and extended their rule to the steppes by the mid-16th century. However, the Golden Horde continued to rule the Crimean Peninsula till the 18th century. Now we move on to the Ilkhanids in Persia, as they took over the Abbasid Empire in 1258 and consolidated their rule. They tried to invade Syria, however, Muslims in Egypt limited their expansion southwest. In Persia, the Mongols did allow the Persians to rule as long as they delivered tax receipts and kept. So now comes the question, what exactly happened to the Mongols after Genghis Khan's death? I know, that video was pretty dark, right? Well, that's life for you. Now we talk about how the Ilkhanids and how the Mongols in China exactly ruled their supported regions. So the Ilkhanate ruled by mainly observing Persian religions of shamanism, but they tolerated all of the religions. However, they mainly gravitated toward Islam, so in 1295, their leader, Ilkhan Ghazan, publicly converted to Islam, and many followed his example. This led to the killings of Christians, Jews, and the return of Islam to Persian society. However, the rule in China was a little bit different. Although Kublai valued the cultural values, he did not respect the Chinese culture of the Song dynasty. The Mongols outlawed intermarriage and prevented the Chinese from learning their own language, and they dismantled the Confucian education system and the examination system, which civil servants used for the Chinese bureaucracy. But why would they need it? Their freaking government was being destroyed by the Mongols, and they were basically in control. So they did, however, tolerate the Confucianism religion and all others, but they continued to mainly follow their native shamanist cults. However, over time, the ruling elite started to fall in love with Lamaist Buddhism, as it held a place for magic, supernatural powers, and it basically resembled the Mongols' shamanism. So therefore, Lamaist Buddhists courted the Mongols' favor. So now that the Mongols declined, what happened to the lands that they were ruling? Well, the Ming dynasty took over China, and a Turkish conqueror named Tamerlane moved on Persia. He idolized Genghis Khan, and like him, he was a charismatic leader, a warrior, which earned him a lot of support. He destroyed any rivals in the 1360s, and by 1370, he extended rule from Chagatai and built an imperial capital in Samarkand, I think. And then he mainly took rich cities to levy taxes and trade and agricultural production, as well as weakened the Golden Horde in Russia. He also campaigned in India, but he didn't declare it as part of his empire. And he was also about to invade China, but guess what? In 1405, he died. So after death, tribal rulers ruled over his empire and mainly received taxes and tributes on their behalf. His sons and grandsons split his empire into 4 regions, and they remained only in control of the empire from Persia to Afghanistan. As the last of his empire vanquished too, the Mughal, Safavid, and Ottoman empires replaced it and reflected the Turkish Muslim legacy, which talked about more in chapter 28. Anyway, we will now talk about one of those empires, and that is the Ottomans. After the Mongols conquered Persia, the nomadic Turks migrated to Anatolia. They followed a charismatic leader named Osman, who launched a campaign to build a state against the Byzantine Empire. So by the 1350s, he attracted enough followers and gained enough advantages over other Turkish rivals and moved to expand their borders. And the Ottomans found even more supporters due to the Byzantines' political fragmentation, ineffective government, and exploitation of peasantry. So they began to move on Constantinople, but Tamerlane temporarily delayed them. However, after his death, the Ottomans regained balance in 1440s, and in 1453, Sultan Mehmed, aka Mehmed the Conqueror, led the invasion and captured Constantinople. He renamed it Istanbul, and by 1480, he controlled all of Greece, the Balkan region, Southwest Asia, Southeastern Europe, Egypt, and North Africa. By then, another nomadic people asserted control over a long-settled society to build a vast empire. And that, my friends, is how the Mongols fell after Genghis Khan, and how other Turkish peoples such as the Ottomans came to power in Eurasia. So while much of the Mongols conquered a lot of Eurasia, they did destroy much of its landmass. However, they did support the interactions between these different societies, which linked Eurasian lands closer, and it encouraged trade, diplomatic travel, missionary efforts, and the migration of people to new lands. This meant that long-distance trade was less risky than earlier times with the Silk Roads, and land from Western Europe to China was directly linked for the first time. The Mongols used these networks for diplomatic dealings with other rulers, and they highly valued their protection of their ambassadors and merchants. This also encouraged religion, with serf missionaries encouraging Islam on the Turkish peoples, Lamist Buddhism from Tibet and the Mongols, and Nestorian Christians in China. The Mongols also encouraged the migrations of new lands due to increased service demand and administrators, and with the more the empire expanded, which led to the Mongols using their allies, such as the highly educated Uyghur Turks. So these conquered peoples also supplied the Mongols with talent. As the Mongols separated those with talent, they were sent to places where there was a demand for their service. Ranks of these conquered peoples included soldiers, bodyguards, administrators, secretaries, translators, physicians, armor makers, metalsmiths, minders, carpenters. So all of this promoted Eurasian integrations by increasing the communication and exchanges between peoples of different societies. So at this point, you're thinking, the Mongol Empire is hella strong and powerful. They can't possibly fall. Well, congratulations, you're an absolute moron who crawled out of the mud of the earth. Because over time, the Mongol Empire started to die. The decline of the Mongols all started in Persia, as their government was spending too much money, which ruined the treasury, and too much exploitation of the peasantry led to reduced revenue. There was a solution to turn paper money so all the metal currency could go to the government, but the people saw it as useless garbage, so merchants decided to close their shops instead. Things got even worse as Ilkhan Ghazan died in 1304 without having an heir to the throne, and therefore their empire collapsed. Low-level governments was established until Turkish peoples reintroduced an effective central government. Now, in China, problems started happening in the Yuan dynasty as the Mongols continued to use paper money that the Tang and Song dynasties used, but it did not maintain adequate reserves of the bullion that backed the paper notes. This led to increased prices as the paper money's value dropped. Factions also started forming as the richest people in China started attracting ambitious warriors, and by the 1320s, China was engulfed by a civil war due to power struggles and imperial assassinations of the government. Oh, and things got even worse as the plague, the bubonic plague to be exact, plagued China as it spread from the Eurasian trade networks. Sound familiar? Huh? Well, yeah. This led to depopulation and labor shortages in China, and it weakened the whole Mongol regime. Rebellions also started to take form in 1368 as they captured Khanbalik and forced the Mongols out of China back to the steppes, although the Mongols totally didn't disappear, as they still had regions in Central Asia, and they were still a threat to Northwestern Asia, specifically around the Great Wall of China. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Golden continued to thrive until a Russian state brought them down in the 16th century, while they did remain a threat to them until the 18th century. So while those Mongols still in the Crimean Peninsula retained their Mongol identity until a man named Joseph Stalin forced them to other parts of the Soviet Union in the mid-20th century. And that was pretty much the downfall.
Chapter 19, it mainly focuses on the effects of early African migrations, the Islamic kingdoms and empires, as well as African society and cultural development. Let's start at the beginning. In the south of the Sahara Desert, they participated in the larger economy of the Eastern Hemisphere, but the desert itself actually posed a challenge to northern trades due to its danger and size. Like Eurasia and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa organized productive societies, powerful states, and participated in large-scale networks and exchange. Between the years 1000 to 1500 CE, Bantu migrations woke Sub-Saharan Africa to expansion and establishment of agricultural societies. By about this time, the Bantu migrations and other migrations were complete, and in the next century, societies were built upon these migrations. The early result of the Bantu migrations was spreading agriculture throughout the land, displacing hunters and gatherers. By this time, the Bantu had iron metallurgy, which mainly provided tools for agriculture. This with food crop exchange resulted in an increase in agriculture, which led to population growth and pressure for continuing migrations. When bananas were introduced in Africa, it encouraged a new migratory surge. They were domesticated in Southeast Asia and traveled to Africa through the Indian Ocean by Malay seafarers from modern Indonesia to East African coasts. Between 300 and 500 CE, they colonized Madagascar and established banana cultivation there. They went to the mainland through Madagascar, and by 500 CE, bananas were well established in mainland Africa. Bananas enriched diets in Africa and provided a new food source, resulting in population growth. Due to migration limits for new land, complex governments began to form for organization. Early Bantu societies did not depend on an elaborate hierarchy of officials or bureaucratic apparatus for their affairs. They mostly used kin-based societies or groups. Male heads were the village's ruling council that decided affairs of groups. The most prominent one was the chief and dealt with neighboring peoples. A group of villages was the district, and the chiefs discussed among themselves to solve issues. Some districts organized public affairs of several 100,000 people. Like the Tiv people in Nigeria were almost 1 million and still used a kin-based society. After 1000 CE, kin-based societies began to face issues. Population booms made strains on resources and not much land was available. This led to conflict, which meant that Bantu societies adopted a military. Districts fell to strong chiefs who imposed their own authority. Some absorbed neighboring lands to form kingdoms like the Kingdom of Ife and Benin. The most active area of political development was the basin of the Congo River. The Kingdom of Congo formed over modern-day Republic of Congo and Angola. It was perhaps the most tightly centralized early Bantu kingdom. Their royal currency were cowries, seashells from the Indian Ocean. Most kin-based societies survived until the 19th century. Merchants from North Africa to Southwest Asia introduced their Islamic faith to Sub-Saharan Africa. It went through the Trans-Saharan network of camel caravans as well as through the Indian Ocean to the coast. The trade barrier that is the Sahara Desert housed desert nomads, who then interacted with those in the north and the south. With the introduction of camels, the desert was easier to traverse in. Camel saddles were also beginning to be distributed. These factors contributed to their domination of being used to traverse the desert. Camels allowed an increase of trans-Saharan trade, as well as trading centers like Galle. During the Muslims' arrival, the principal state was the Kingdom of Ghana. 22 kings ruled in Ghana before Muhammad embarked the Hijra. During this time, gold became an increasingly sought product for trade. Ghana became the most important trade center for gold, as many merchants flocked to it across the Sahara. The rulers got gold from their southern areas as it had a surplus of it. Ghana also gave ivory and slaves from North Africa. They received horses, cloth, and salt, which was a necessity due to their low amount of it. The capital of Ghana was at Kumbi Saleh. It was described by al-Bakri as flourishing and supporting many Qadi and Muslim scholars. They financed a large army to protect their gold and defended from nomadic invasions. By the 10th century, Ghana's kings converted to Islam. Conversion meant better relations with North African Muslim merchants and Muslim nomads, as well as support from Muslim states in North Africa. The kings of Ghana allowed their society to not forcibly convert to Islam, nor did they accept Islam exclusively. The people were allowed to observe their own customs and traditions. Islam did, however, attract converts. The kingdom, very sadly, fell to the Mali Empire and their idiotic and greedy leader who can't just move on. The Lion Prince, or Sundiata, reigned from 1230 to 1255 and built the Mali Empire in relation to his family's murder by his ex-kingdom's enemies. He assembled a large army. Mali controlled trade more than Ghana by taxing almost all trade passing through Western Africa. Their capital, Niani, attracted merchants in the gold trade. The Mali Empire encouraged Islam in their state but did not force it on people. The significance of trade and Islam was greatest when Mansa Musa took the throne. Mansa Musa ruled from 1312 to 1337 and was Sundiata's grandnephew. He made an Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 to 1325. His party had many people, including soldiers and slaves, with much gold. The pilgrimage inspired him to build mosques and send Muslim scholars to study in North Africa. During Mansa Musa, the empire declined and the Songhay Empire took it over.